always a good time when Donnie Hubbard is in the building here at The Blend, and we're at the Reserve in Wellington. How are you, my friend?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Listen, you are the fashion plate, the haberdashery king of North America. How's that?
Close.
So
Close.
Let's talk about Donnie Hubbard, professional clothier, and I heard fabric aficionado.
Yes.
So let's talk about Donnie Hubbard. Tell me your story. Now you're immediately, I was drawn to you because we have something in common. We're both LA kids.
Right. Grew up in Los Angeles, born and raised in Southern California, about 35 miles east of Los Angeles, a town called Covina.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1989, grandparents retired, and my great-grandparents were still alive and living in Van Buren, Arkansas. So grandfather wanted to be close to them. We wanted to be close to the grandparents. So it was a mass exodus out of LA, and it actually, everybody says the same thing. Oh my God, that must have been a...
Well, I would imagine, because you're a teenager.
Right.
You go from Los Angeles to Fort Smith, Arkansas area.
Yep.
That had to be a culture shock for you.
Huge. But being a poor kid from LA, and then the opportunities that, obviously much less expensive to live in Arkansas, especially in 1989,
Mm-hmm.
just opened a lot of opportunities for my family. And, immediately in our living situation went from 800 square feet to 2,500 square feet for the same amount of money, for less than the same amount of money. So, that was kind of what brought us here. And then, started... I was not into fashion in Los Angeles even a little bit, didn't know anything about it.
And again, that's to me the funny part, or the ironic part, that you're living in Los Angeles, California, with all
Right.
the glitz and the glamour, and you go, with no disrespect, but you go to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and that's how you get into
Right.
fashion. How did that happen?
Right. So when I was a kid, I was involved in a scouting organization, and we were looking for the best group around that was involved in that organization, called Royal Rangers, and heard that a church in Fort Smith had a good group, and so that's what drew us to that point. And I met this guy, gentleman named Paul Rainwater. His family owned a clothing store in Fort Smith. It was the nicest store in town. And I was pretty enamored with the way he dressed, the way he spoke, the way that he presented himself, and just basically sidled up to him and made him mentor me as a 13-year-old kid.
That's great. And
just hung out. And I will never forget when I was a kid, probably at that point 14. He took me in so much so that I would travel with him to different speaking engagements. And I was I'll never forget this, wearing a baseball cap on the back of my head, a little bit of hair hanging out the front like all my friends did. And he, as a mentor, he was brutally honest with me.
Mm-hmm.
And he looks at me, he was like, "Donnie, you look like an idiot." And he literally handed me my very first ever GQ magazine. And he said, "Here, there's an article about where baseball caps come from, what they're about, and why they are what they are, and how you're supposed to wear it, read it." And I will never forget the feeling of embarrassment, but at the same time, the decision-making process in my head to not be offended and really figure it out and learn. And that was my first experience in learning about why things are the way they are and why clothing is what it is. And then I immediately pulled my cap down and
bend it in the middle.
Bend it in the middle.
No flat brims. I'm talking to my son. No flat brims. Bend it in the middle.
And that was like one of those most impactful moments in my life. And then, of course, I was reading GQ, and I'm like, this is a whole new world. And, of course, he started feeding me some clothing. And fast forward, 19 years old, I'm sitting in my apartment. I was living with a friend of mine, working at a restaurant, and I was waiting tables. And the phone call went like this. And back before cell phones, caller ID. The phone rings, I pick it up, and his distinct voice. And all he said, "Donnie, yes, are you ready?" My response to that was, "It's about time." And so on Monday, I started my job at Rainwater's Clothing, and just fell in love with it, right? Fell in love the interaction with the customers, the people, and so on and so forth.
So that was your first aha moment.
Correct.
And I've always said, the hardest thing is everybody has that door of opportunity, but the hardest part is walking through it.
Correct.
Sometimes, necessity is the mother of invention, but how did you recognize that and say, I'm going in?
Well, like I said, I was in love with Paul as a friend, as a mentor. And I recognized when I first met him as a poor kid, I thought he was rich, right? And I was like, man, I'll never be rich. But when I realized he wasn't necessarily wealthy, he just dressed that way. He interacted with those customers because he was the one selling them clothes. I remember thinking to myself, I'll probably never be rich, but I can do that. Right. I can insert myself in this lifestyle if I do that. And so when he offered me the job, of course, he asked, they had an employee quit, which is why he called me up. Even their employee was like, well, this kid that hangs out here all the time, that's who you should hire.
Right.
And so I just took it by the horns and had a couple other situations, like other jobs in Fort Smith that I got to interact with some wealthier individuals. And when they would come in the store, they would see me. And when Paul, and hands off to this guy for recognizing they were customers of his, but he enjoyed the fact that I interacted so well with him. He was willing to hand them off to me. And then I ended up being the first person in the history of that store that ever outsold the family members. Wow. So it was really cool. And I spend a lot of effort and energy honoring the guy that got me into the situation.
So you find your niche, you dominate that niche, and now It's time to go out and start your own business.
Yeah, so I'll make a very long story short. I got hired by the nicest store in Arkansas, out of Little Rock, and they wanted to have a presence in Northwest Arkansas before it was Northwest Arkansas. Kudos to the guy that hired me, and he recognized that there was something special happening up here. So when I went to work for that store in Little Rock, I never actually lived in Little Rock. I worked for them out of my house. So for 3 years, I sold clothes out of the trunk of my car, and it was my introduction to uber luxury, right? So I was selling Brioni, Oxford, Xenia, you name it, all the big boy brands. And I was doing it out of the trunk of my car and really made a run at it and did well at it.
Well, sometimes you can take the kid out of LA, but you can't take the...
Right. And just worked my guts out. I remember 6 months into that job, because nobody's coming to my house and buying clothes, right? I didn't have a store. It was so stressful and so hard to get people to buy clothes out of my car that I was standing in my shower with, it was an aha moment of water running over my face, my hands on my face, going, what have you done? You no longer get to stand in the store and people just come in and you don't have to work for it. And then I remember thinking, all right, shake that off. You got to make 50 phone calls today. And I was doing the math in my head. Out of 50 phone calls, 5 people will give you an appointment. And out of those 5 people, 2 will buy something. And that was my metric, right? Like, so if I could get 2 people a week to buy something, and then it just started growing. And then I started getting referrals. And then, like when people started, building relationships with me, it became easier and easier. And then had my grandmother passed away, inherited a little bit of money. My father inherited a little bit of money, and not a well-to-do guy, but he was amazingly just handed me enough to go to my boss and say, hey, the selling clothes out of my car thing is really tough. I'd much rather do this the right way. I'll put my own money into it if you'll help me open a store. So we did a partnership of opening my first shop in Northwest Arkansas.
And that was in Rogers?
That was in Rogers, Arkansas. We opened in a weird location. It was in an office building where once you were there, you still couldn't figure out where you were. Like, people would be calling me. So I'm at an office building and I'd say, are you driving a silver BMW? Yes. Okay, I see your car. You're here. Where? And so even out of a space like that, we ended up doing very well. It was very unique. And then, of course, 2008 was a few years in. It was tough. My
economy goes to poop.
Yep. My partner comes to me and says, hey, if you're ever considering buying the store, now would be a good time because I need the money and it's the best price you'll ever get. So long story short, went and found the financing. We had a couple of location moves, and I opened legitimately my very own first store with, where I was in control of the buying and the merchandising and the product and everything. So,
and then record scratch, it's off to Louisville.
So, I'll condense this part down. Meanwhile, when I opened the week I was opening my first store, my wife was probably 6 months pregnant, which was a big factor in.
Sure.
I got to get off the road. I got to open a store. I'm having a kid, and so we had our daughter. She's an amazing kid. Follow that up with a few years later, 3.5 years later, 4 years later, we had our son. Mm-hmm. In 2014, got an autism diagnosis on him, severely autistic. He speaks, but not conversationally still. He's 11 years old now. So we were navigating all of that and just life in general, it's hard. And being a young guy in this industry, I was being recruited by every better store in the country. And of course, I own my store. Why would I leave? After getting the diagnosis on Luke, we were really trying to figure out, is Arkansas the best place for him? I'm being offered this job in Louisville, Kentucky by one of the best stores in the country. They wanted me to come and kind of be the face of their organization. There was some promises on the back end of, they didn't have a succession plan. So in our minds, bigger city, better services, maybe it's better for Luke if we move there. So we made a big move to Louisville, Kentucky. It was great. We loved the town. I got quite an education in bourbon while I was there.
Yeah, Woodford Double Oak, my friend. So.
Correct, sir.
Ding, ding.
Ding, ding. And while we were there, 6 months in, we found out about Andrew, and he's my 4-year-old.
By the way, give her a break, will you?
Right?
Go to work. Turn on the TV. Come on.
We didn't have a whole lot of friends. We had no friends, no family in Louisville, and not a whole lot to do except for do bourbon tours.
Right.
A lot of cigars being consumed while we were there. And so Andrew, having a little boy with autism and having a baby with no family and no friends on top of autism, time to go home.
Time to come back to Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah. And so while I was in Louisville, I learned a lot about, what an old store like that is, 105-year-old store at the time, what they were doing right, what they were doing wrong. I pitched them a lot of ideas that were probably too progressive at the time for them to be able to pull off, in their defense. It was just going to be a hard thing
to sell.
Yeah. It was going to be hard to transition their customers to make a radical change the way I was presenting it. And so, but I came up with all those ideas while I was there. And so naturally, when I moved home, I just did them all. Right. I was like, this
I'm
thing.
going to put my money where my mouth is and do my own stuff.
Make it experiential, make it, over the top, cool.
And I think that's the key when you go to your shop, and it's Hubbard Clothing Co, hubbardclothingco.com. And
that's right.
Having been fortunate enough to go to your store, and you walk in there, and again, luxury men's items, it's great. But then there's also that experience of going to your members' lounge area. So tell me about how that came about, and ultimately it's about how did cigars become part of that?
That's kind of two different stories.
The one thing about this show is everybody has to tell me how the cigar found them. Right. And there's a trend of gas stations.
Right.
And lo and behold, Mr. Donnie Hubbard's at a gas station. And
correct. So, back up to my first job.
Uh-huh.
My mentor and I were both driving to Dallas in separate cars for market down in Dallas. I was a buyer at that store. They let me jump in on the buying team. And we stopped at a gas station, and Paul Rainwater is his name. He runs into this gas station. I didn't need gas. I guess he was using the restroom. He comes out with a cigar in his mouth, and I'd never seen him smoking a cigar before, ever. And so I'm like, "What are you doing?" Listen, I was the guy who I never touched alcohol until I was 35. Never smoked anything as a kid, and I'm literally probably 22 at this point, about to get married. I was engaged to my wife, and he comes out with this cigar in his mouth. I was like, "What are you doing?" And he just laughed and jumped in his car. I was in mine because I had to leave earlier than they did. And I was intrigued. And so being in the clothing business, I knew that a lot of my higher end customers all smoked cigars. I would smell it on them. They'd come in talking about it. And so I was intrigued in that lifestyle of, why are these guys smoking cigars? Like, why is it always the higher end guys?
Right.
And so when I come home from that trip, literally the day I got home from Dallas, I go up to a tobacco shop, and I'm looking around, and it is zero education on cigars whatsoever. And I'm like, there it is, Swisher Sweets. I buy a box of Swisher Sweets.
Oh boy.
Go home, pull one out, I light it up, and I'm like, that is the most terrible thing. I do not get it. People are insane. Why would anybody do that? Throw it in the trash. I'm good. But then still the thought of it was like nagging on me. Why do the luxury guys like this?
Yeah, right.
So I go to Fort Smith. I live a few miles from Fort Smith. Go to Fort Smith, go to Barnes & Noble. I buy a Cigar Aficionado magazine, right? I open this magazine, and I'm looking at the cigars in this magazine. I'm like, that is not what I was smoking. So I open, again, back before cell phones are prevalent and all that. So I open the phone book. I look up tobacco shops. Here's a shop in Fort Smith that says pipes and tobacco. That's got to be different. I run down there. I walk in. I look at the guy. I'm like, listen, I want to try this. Pick me something out. I'm a beginner. Mm-hmm. Like, I pride myself in not being pretentious about anything I don't know about, right?
Right.
Like, let's pretend I'm horseback riding and I've never even seen a horse, okay? And he's like, okay. And so I said, just pick me out a cigar. He's like, got it. So he goes in the humidor. He comes back out. Never forget it. Romeo and Juliet, a Bully. First cigar I ever smoked. Mild, nice. Hands it to me, and he's like, do you want me to cut it? And I was like, I don't know what that means. Like,
am I going to bleed?
Right.
Is this something I need a Band-Aid for?
Level 0. I know nothing. And at that point, he's like, okay, I understand. I said, yes, I want you to cut it, and I want you to teach me how to cut it, like what that means, and everything that goes along with it. And so he teaches me how to light it, toast foot, like draw, the whole 9 yards. I go home after he's cut this cigar for me. I sit on my back patio. I light this thing up. I take one smoke, and I was like, I get it.
And this would be, for purposes of this interview, that's aha moment number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I was like, that I understand. And I was immediately hooked. I drove straight to my brother-in-law's house, my future brother-in-law, my best friend since we were 13. And I'm kind of smiling. I'm like, so I got something. And I pull out a couple cigars.
Right.
And the really, that's one of the sweetest parts of the story is he started smoking cigars with me. I kind of got him into it. And then lo and behold, like I grew up around my wife's family from the time I was 13 on. Her brother was my very best friend. Mm-hmm. And it goes way, we don't have time for it, but it goes way farther back than that. My grandparents randomly, when they were in their 20s, actually lived with my wife's grandparents in a duplex in the 40s. And
so this was preordained.
Yes. So I've known these people for a long, long time, and I was practically already another grandchild to my wife's grandparents, and so when I started dating my wife, I'd go over to the grandparents' house with my brother-in-law and my wife, and lo and behold, their grandfather like comes out and starts smoking a cigar with us, and before he died, I mean, like that to me was one of the sweetest memories I've got. Right. Every single time.
Right.
I would go to my wife's grandparents' house. My wife and my daughter would stay in the house with her grandmother and my wife's grandfather. He had the softest hands of any human being I've ever met. He would grab my hand and be like, "You want to go smoke?" and I never turned that man down. I don't care if it was 12 degrees outside. Some of my favorite memories were smoking out on the patio with my wife's grandfather.
And I think that's what cigars do. Just the
Yeah.
smell, it takes you back, it takes you back to a time where your grandfather, or your grandmother, it's that connection. It's that family. It is the biggest
For sure.
branch of your family tree and stuff. So now you know cigars. There's that connection with fashion and clothing. And so now you start incorporating that to some degree into creating a more of an experience, because we talked about it before. When you go to Hubbard Clothing,
Sure.
it's not, I'm going to buy a shirt, I'm going to buy a pair of shoes, because you can do that anywhere.
Correct.
It's an experience. So tell me about
Right.
this members lounge that you have at Hubbard
Yeah.
Clothing.
So one of the ideas I pitched to Louisville was, let's create a spot where we can have a private area where guys can have a drink and pick out fabric and just hang out. The whole idea was keep them in the store longer than 20 minutes to look around, buy a shirt, and leave. Get them to want to make it a destination, right?
Mhm.
And so when I built the store out, I dedicated 1,000 square feet of our store to zero retail. It's just a spot for men and women to come and hang out and have a drink. And then quickly, like, I jumped on with Brian. We put a few cigars in.
Right. Brian Waters, our buddy from Open Door.
Correct. And Brian got me a humidor. We put it in. And so now we've created a patio situation out on the back patio outside the lounge where guys can have a smoke if they want to. But more importantly, it's a camaraderie thing,
A
right?
community.
It's a community where, and again, it's kind of a sneak attack. I get them to stick around long enough. They got to walk past the clothes coming in. They got to walk past the clothes going out. And
I mean, and to me, having been at your shop, it's this lounge this is not two chairs and a table. This,
right.
I mean, this is like, it is
It's
amazing
very
in
nice.
terms of the fabrics for the couches and the members and the paintings on the ceiling, and
Right.
you've got mounted,
animals. Everybody loves dead animals.
I mean, how did that all come? And for me, when you see that,
Right.
I guess the hardest thing, and you can always tell, is people never want to sit back and enjoy it, but you've got to sit there one day. You've got to sit there
listen.
one day, put your hands on your hips and go, God damn it, I did
I kind of use that the same way that I encourage my customers to use it as a workspace.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we want is for customers that are members to use it as a workspace, a meeting space, obviously just a community hangout space. We do events there. We do trunk shows back there. Give people that aren't members opportunities to come back there and experience it. But for me, when I wanted to do all of that, I hired a designer named Chris Goddard. He knocked it out of the park. I wanted it to be art-centric because of what's happening with the art scene in Northwest Arkansas, thus the paintings on the ceilings and, all of that. I wanted it to be mensy without being super mensy where women felt uncomfortable with being there. I think the guy nailed it. He
Well,
took,
you know me, I'm really conservative with the way I dress, and
Right, I see that.
this is my scene. This is my
Absolutely.
scene over there. Okay, so the Rogers store is set. You're doing well
Right.
over there, and now it's time. It's on to the next thing. It's on what's next, and now comes Fayetteville.
So Fayetteville, my business partner Steve Clark, he got an early line on a space that was opening up. A business was moving out, and he really liked the bones of the space because it was an old bank building, right? So this particular space had a vault in the back, and we wanted to open a denim shop in Fayetteville. Thought it'd be good for, opening price point, get younger people in.
Right.
And we opened a denim shop down there, had Chris design it, since it was a little bit more sportswear
You're
center.
literally in a bank vault.
Yeah, so we turned the bank vault into the fitting rooms, right? And did it decadently. It's lined with velvet and cool carpet on the floor.
Wow.
And so we opened it as a denim shop. And then 7 months later, pandemic hit,
Hello.
and we had to circle the wagons.
A nice kick in the junk. Yeah.
Yep. Protect the main store that was the main driver of business. So we made a swift decision to close the Fayetteville store, even though it was only open for 7 months. But that was a problem. It wasn't making money yet. But the space was so cool. Everybody who walked into the denim shop would immediately say, this would be a really cool bar.
Right.
And so that stuck out in my mind when everything kind of shut down. I still had the lease, so I was like, you know what? The lounge situation is working so well in Rogers. Why don't we move this over to Fayetteville?
And Fayetteville's a college town, so there's always
but it's also
it's eclectic. It's
Yes.
got a good mishmash of people that work for you.
Yes.
And now this space, the Fayetteville store, it's not retail, right? It's a lounge.
Not anymore. So what we ended up doing was taking the model of the lounge and applying that to the entire space in Fayetteville. And so we built out the lockers just like we have in Rogers, but we put those in the vault because my 13-year-old kid mind was like, that'd be cool to have to go in the vault to go get your booze.
Absolutely.
You know, so I just thought the cool factor of it was that would be great. Put some beautiful furniture in. We spent a little bit of money building out the bar area and put again, the 13-year-old Donnie was like, you know, it'd be really cool is if there was a thumbprint lock on the door.
Now we're talking Fort Knox secret agent stuff now, right?
So all the members, we added their thumbprint to the lock. So to gain access, that one is open 24 hours a day.
24 hours a day.
So you can enter anytime. We know who it is. You know, member has to be present because it's their thumbprint. You go in, it's all self-service. I eliminated the need for inventory. I eliminated the need for employees. I eliminated all the overhead that goes along with retail. And now we basically deal in real estate, right? We're selling lockers.
Right.
And
I think underneath it all, you're selling what we've talked about, experience.
Correct. And then the space next door became available, and I immediately jumped on that because it was just the right thing to do to create more of an environment.
Right.
There was some bathroom access issues that solved getting that space, and we just finished the complete renovation of that, and it's off to the races. It's really, really special.
As a businessman, and it's something that I really live by, and we've talked about it a lot on this show. It's if you want to be successful, you hang out with successful people. So as a successful business person, what is your mantra? What is your core values in terms of how do you run? How do you make a business? I mean, what advice would you give somebody that says, hey, listen, I got an idea, it's this, whatever it is, how do you do it?
So, couple of things.
You can't be afraid to fail.
Can't be afraid to fail, obviously. Whatever you're doing, find out what your strengths are and hammer those until they're just dead, right? Like, stick with what you're good at. Go have a vision, complete those things. I've been guilty of being distracted by other things, as we all have, but figure out what you're really good at. And what I'm good at is creating relationships and excitement, right? People, one of the most common things people say about me to my face, and I'm not just saying like I hear to my face, is that your enthusiasm for this product literally makes me want to buy it.
Right.
So literally just the enthusiasm of what you're doing, if you can get other people to catch on to the vision, whether it's the clothing I sell or the environment that I'm trying to get people to be a part of, and we don't want everybody to be a part of it. We keep the membership kind of exclusive. You know, it is, I feel like it's just expensive enough to weed out the people that are like wishy-washy about it, but not so expensive that it's unattainable, right? And it gives us a chance to have people, we like referrals, and I feel like say if Brian Waters brings me somebody, I already know that he understands
because it's been vetted.
Yes, he understands exactly what I'm trying to do. And so if Brian brings me somebody, I know that he's already thought about, this is a guy that will respect Donnie's stuff and be a valid person.
Question I always like to ask people, and it's maybe not an easy question. What does legacy mean to Donnie Hubbard?
I mean, it depends on the context of what that is, right? So, again, I go back to family, to, like the business, my mentor. I spend a lot of time giving honor where it's due.
Mm-hmm.
I think, another one of my mantras is, whether you're a Christian or not or whatever, goes back to biblical values of Matthew 7:12, right? And that's, therefore in all things whatsoever you would that men do unto you, do ye also to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the golden rule.
Mm-hmm.
Treat other people how you want to be treated, and that's never been a bad thing for me, right? And so listen, I can buy beautiful product all day long and it's gonna sell because it's beautiful. That's my clothing mantra. Buy beautiful things, people will buy it. You get what you pay for.
Right.
And a luxury customer understands that. I've had more people buy crappy suits somewhere else and then come in and be like, all right, I want to know like what the difference is here. And I can convey that. I can articulate that in a way that they understand it. And once they put it on, they get that. The clothing part is easy. The experience is hard for a lot of people. And when we got that right, it was off to the races.
Before I let you go, how am I doing?
You're doing good.
Brian, how am I doing with
You're
this?
doing good. But
Right?
I mean,
it's not a Donnie Hubbard suit.
That's what I was going to say.
It's not, it's,
you don't have an H lapel pin in yet.
I'm working on it.
Once we get you there, it'll be you'll notice the difference.
What are you smoking before we let you go?
My man Nick Perdomo, he came in the shop, loved it, and has been a supporter ever since. So I support him. This is a Perdomo Habano.
Yeah.
Fantastic smoke.
Yeah, I got a little Padron 26 here. So with that, I will cheers to you,
Thanks,
your
sir.
success, and your continued success. Keep thriving, my friend.
Thank you very
Right?
much.
It's Donnie Hubbard. And by the way, we want to give a huge shout out, a huge hug to all our friends here at the Reserve at Wellington's, Northwest Arkansas. If you're in the area, you got to come by. You say hello. Restaurant, cigar shop, cigar lounge. Just, it's an experience. Kind of talk with Donnie. It's an experience within itself. And again, I'm the lucky one because I get to hang out with guys like this. So Donnie, thanks for the time, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll come in and open my locker up and we'll have smoke.
Oh, well. And by the way, keep that. There was a sports coat that I've got my eye on. Keep that eye on for me.
I've already got pulled back.
All right. Cheers, everybody.